Welcome back to Next Gen Investing. It's now time for FOMO, and we are talking now Block, which is up 8% on the session. You know, this name to me has a massive identity crisis. I won't even get too far into it, but the fact that they changed their name to Block, and then we saw like the unraveling of crypto prices basically right after, to me is like speaks perfectly to some of their lack of identity in the crypto and mining space. But what we do know is the company is getting a positive endorsement today. As positive as any, as it is now joining the S&P 500. So that's huge.
You know, it certainly is. The street likes this one, or at least they like it right now. They're up 8%, like you said. But the fintech company does have a mixed investment profile. You know, they're extremely volatile. They have good balance sheet metrics, but they've had deteriorating growth, and they've had a lot of profitability challenges. Now, we know from history that getting included in the S&P 500 always gives a boost to anyone who gets included. It has a lot of buying pressure, passive funds come in, and it'll up their institutional investor base because they'll have people who have index strategies. So, you know, that will be a good bolster for Block, but their revenue growth has decelerated significantly. So some analysts have questions about their growth trajectory. Their 3-year average growth rate is just over 13%. That does exceed the S&P's 5.5%, but recent performance does have some concerning trends that analysts are citing. Their revenue growth slowed to just 4.6% in the past year, and that does fall below the S&P. But if you look at their price history, like in the last 6 months, they're down 12%. If you go year to date, it's only 7%. If you look at the last month, they're up almost 24%. So an extremely volatile stock. Mixed valuation. Their PE ratio of 17.2 trades below the S&P, which could imply it's attractively valued, but it also could imply some of this volatility. And it does have a lot of sensitivity to market conditions. Like you mentioned, any changes, and we've seen a very volatile response from this stock.
And we've also seen, unfortunately, like some of the commentary from the sell side has been like the lack of trust in some of their platforms. Like Cash App has a perception issue. And I've used all of these just for my own market research to like how it competes with like PayPal's Venmo. But there have been reports just historically about like doesn't have the same perception. It's also late to the growth stage that PayPal is already so established. I mean, PayPal has such a huge catalog of merchants already existing in their network. Square, or Block, excuse me, has been trying to grow and build. But actually, I was looking at the two comparatively. Their charts are very similar as of late, which then makes you say, who's really winning then? Because both of these do serve a huge critical need. I mean, Venmo, I feel like when it first came out, it was like life-changing, truly technology, that peer-to-peer type payment, as well as Cash App. But who is really dominating right now? Both of these names look, frankly, lackluster on the year.
I mean, it's interesting you bring up the competitive, because fintech has such intense competition. I mean, it's just really a competitive sense in both traditional financial institutions, because, you know, you've got JP Morgan Chase has Zelle, and then you have emerging technology companies, you have PayPal, and so they have a lot. But their revenue growth deceleration does imply that they could be losing market share, facing pricing pressure at a minimum. Also, we're seeing more regulatory scrutiny of fintech operations, which for a company like this is never going to be positive. And it's particularly around consumer protection and financial stability, which is what you just said they have a bit of a PR issue with, because everyone has heard some sort of Cash App horror story. And so I think they're trying to fix that, but those are ongoing challenges. Also, Block has shown that they are highly sensitive to economic conditions and interest rate changes, and in a way that PayPal is not as impacted. So, you know, it's a little bit tougher for them. I think their dependence on consumer spending and small business activity particularly makes it vulnerable in potential economic downturns and times of uncertainty. And, you know, we know that that is a word we use multiple times on a daily basis.
And it has not let up. No. As I was hoping this earnings season, we might say uncertainty a bit less. It has not been that way. But I know that the banks as a group did not maybe perform like hugely optimistically post earnings. But I will say that if you looked at the reports to the extent that we did it, of course, they were pretty strong. So that maybe bodes well for like the strength of the consumer, or maybe we're seeing more of this like legacy type of bank that is flourishing right now as it can withstand some of the volatility, whereas say Block, maybe not as immune. Like you said, it definitely sees that risk to the overall market.
It does. I mean, it's extremely volatile to market exposure if we look back just historically. So let's look at like the inflation shock in 2022. The stock collapsed 86%. The decline was more than 3 times the S&P 500's. That was 25%. They have not yet recovered from that drop off. They only got as high as just under $100, 98, 92, I think, in December of 24. And now they're sitting right around the $78 mark. So it's an incomplete recovery. And typically over a long period of time, you would see a recovery if there weren't investor concerns about fundamentals.
I'm also very curious to see how like the whole crypto narrative will play out as the company continues to grow. I mean, it hasn't really been like the headline grabbing part of the story by any means, but we talk about stable coins challenging the traditional legacy payment framework. That also doesn't really bode well for Block unless they can figure out a way of like you can't beat them, join them. But maybe that's what Cash App, I guess you can utilize Bitcoin.
I mean, and it's a possibility, too, that some of this recent legislation coming out of Crypto Week could make people feel safer, even though that's not necessarily some of its functionality. I think the idea and the headlines that it's in the news and it's being regulated makes more everyday people feel comfortable with its adoption. And I know that was some of the goal behind it. But if they can figure out how to use it and help the regular people who are using Cash App feel comfortable using it, that certainly could help give them a boost.
I completely agree. And I will say it's a very user-friendly interface. It just is unfortunate that I feel like the clientele of the past maybe has given now the perception that is still the exact same Cash App it was years ago. But I mean, I also have not been on the platform itself in a long, long time, but very user-friendly. So we'll give it that. But we'll leave it there for now our FOMO discussion today.